Rome, Britain, the Soviet Union. The pattern is so obvious it's almost embarrassing that nobody talks about it. Every empire in history has collapsed the same way. Not from foreign invasion, not from stronger enemies. They all rotted from the inside out. Overextension, crushing debt, currency debasement, social division that turned citizens against each other. And right now, as you watch this, the exact same playbook is unfolding again. Same pattern, different empire. The question isn't whether this cycle will repeat. It already is. The question is whether you'll recognize it before it's too late. Today, we're going to trace the identical path that has destroyed every superpower in recorded history. And you're going to see just how far down that road we've already traveled. The expansion trap. Every superpower makes the same first mistake. They expand beyond their ability to maintain control. Rome stretched from Britain to Mesopotamia. The British Empire covered a quarter of the globe. The Soviet Union tried to dominate Eastern Europe, Central Asia, and half of Africa. At first, expansion feels like strength. More territory, more resources, more power. An empire that overextends itself is an empire preparing for its own funeral. But here's what they don't teach you in school. Every new territory requires soldiers to defend it, administrators to run it, infrastructure to connect it, money to maintain it. The costs compound exponentially while the benefits plateau. Rome stationed legions on distant frontiers, paying soldiers who never saw Rome, defending borders that added nothing to Roman prosperity. Britain maintained a navy larger than the next two powers combined, bleeding treasure to protect trade routes that increasingly benefited others. Expansion becomes a trap. You can't pull back without appearing weak. You can't stay without going broke. And every empire falls into this trap believing they are the exception. But there are no exceptions, only patterns. And this pattern leads directly to the next stage of collapse. Debt spiral begins. Once you're overextended, there's only one way to pay for it: debt. Rome debased its currency, mixing base metals into silver coins until the denarius was worthless. Britain borrowed to fight 2 world wars and never recovered. The Soviet Union printed rubles until they needed wheelbarrows to buy bread. Debt always destroys empires. But here's the insidious part. Debt feels like a solution at first. You can maintain the army, keep the bureaucracy running, fund the infrastructure, everything looks normal. The collapse happens gradually, then suddenly. Rome's currency lost 95% of its value over 2 centuries, but the final collapse took less than a generation. The numbers stop meaning anything when trust disappears. Today, global debt stands at over $300 trillion. The United States alone owes $34 trillion. These numbers are so large they've become abstractions. But debt is never abstract for long. If you're starting to connect the dots here, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide. Because what comes next is how they try to hide the debt. And that's where things get really ugly. Inflation tax. When debt becomes unmanageable, empires discover a magical solution. Print more money, debase the currency, transfer wealth from savers to debtors, from citizens to the state. Inflation is taxation without legislation. This isn't incompetence, it's policy. The Roman government paid soldiers in increasingly worthless coins while demanding taxes in gold. The result: farmers abandoned their land, trade collapsed, cities emptied. The Weimar Republic printed marks until people wallpapered their homes with currency. Worthless. And here's what they never tell you. Inflation doesn't hurt everyone equally. The rich own assets that rise with inflation: real estate, stocks, gold. The poor and middle class hold cash and wages that lose value every day. Rich get richer, poor get poorer. Every empire that debases its currency experiences the same wealth transfer, from the many to the few, from the productive to the connected. This isn't conspiracy, it's mathematics, and the mathematics always lead to the same destination: social fracture, but not the kind you'd expect. The divide strategy. A population united is dangerous to those in power. A population divided is controllable. Every failing empire learns this lesson. Rome pitted patricians against plebeians, rich against poor, citizens against slaves, pagans against Christians. Divide the people, and you can rule forever. The British Empire mastered divide and rule across India, Africa, and the Middle East. Sunni against Shia, Hindu against Muslim, tribe against tribe. The Soviet Union divided society into classes, with informants in every apartment block, turning neighbors into enemies. When citizens fight each other, they forget who's really taking from them. Look around today. Left versus right, urban versus rural, old versus young, native versus immigrant. Every division is amplified, every grievance weaponized. And while you're fighting your neighbor over pronouns or borders or whatever today's outrage happens to be, they keep taking everything. The wealth concentration continues. The wars continue. The surveillance expands. Division isn't a bug in the system. It's the feature that keeps you distracted while the empire eats itself. And when division reaches its peak, the next stage becomes inevitable. Elite extraction. As the empire crumbles, the elites accelerate their extraction. They know the end is coming. They've read the same history books you have, so they grab everything they can before the music stops. In Rome's final centuries, senators accumulated vast estates while peasants starved. They exempted themselves from taxes while increasing the burden on everyone else. The measure of a civilization is how it treats its weakest members. The Soviet nomenclatura lived in luxury while average citizens queued for bread. When the USSR collapsed, they became the oligarchs, owning what everyone had supposedly shared. 1. Tax avoidance becomes legal for the connected. 2. Regulations crush small competitors. 3. Bailouts flow to the failures at the top. 4. Ordinary people pay for elite mistakes. This pattern repeats with mechanical precision. The rules that apply to you never apply to them. Their failures get rescued. Yours get punished. And by the time the population realizes the game was rigged, the extraction is complete. But extraction creates a problem the elites never anticipate. Trust evaporates. Empires don't run on force alone. They run on trust. Trust in currency. Trust in institutions. Trust in the social contract. When trust dies, the empire dies with it. Romans stopped believing their coins held value. They stopped believing the emperor protected them. They stopped believing in Rome itself. The British colonial subjects stopped believing in the benevolence of empire. Once the myth shattered, the reality followed. Soviet citizens stopped believing in communism decades before the wall fell. They pretended. Everyone pretended. But pretending isn't believing. Trust once lost never returns. Today, trust in institutions has collapsed to historic lows. Government, media, banks, corporations, churches, science. Every pillar that once held society together is crumbling under the weight of revealed lies and broken promises. And when trust disappears, something else fills the vacuum. Something that accelerates the collapse even faster. Competence crisis. Declining empires stop selecting for competence. They select for loyalty, for ideology, for connections. The results are always catastrophic. Late Roman emperors appointed generals based on political reliability rather than military skill. The legions that once conquered the world couldn't defend their own borders. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create good times. Good times create weak men. Weak men create hard times. The Soviet Union promoted party members who recited the correct slogans, while actual engineers and scientists were purged for ideological deviation. Bridges collapsed. Harvests failed. Chernobyl exploded. When you punish truth-tellers, you're left with only liars. Look at today's institutions. Are the people running them the most capable or the most compliant? Are decisions made based on reality or based on what's safe to say? Loyalty over competence destroys. When organizations prioritize anything above competence, decline becomes inevitable. The infrastructure crumbles. The systems fail. The people who know how to fix things have been silenced or pushed out, and that leaves one final stage. Barbarians arrive. Here's the part everyone misunderstands. The barbarians don't destroy empires. They just arrive after empires have already destroyed themselves. Rome's barbarian invasion succeeded because there was nothing left to defend. The legions were gone, the treasury empty, the population demoralized. The Visigoths who sacked Rome in 410 AD met almost no resistance. Hollow, the empire was a hollow shell. Grand buildings and impressive titles concealing absolute decay. Enemies don't defeat empires, they just collect the pieces. The Soviet Union wasn't conquered. It simply stopped existing one day when everyone realized there was nothing left to maintain. Britain's empire didn't fall to superior force. The colonies simply walked away when London could no longer pretend to control them. Weakness invites what strength prevents. The barbarians are always waiting, not necessarily with armies, sometimes with economic leverage, sometimes with cultural influence, sometimes with debt traps. They wait for weakness, and every empire eventually provides it. But even now, the pattern isn't complete. Denial until end. The most consistent feature of imperial collapse is denial. Right up until the final moment, empires believe they are exceptional, that the rules don't apply to them, that somehow this time will be different. It is difficult to get a man to understand something when his salary depends upon his not understanding it. Roman emperors were still issuing edicts as the Visigoths marched toward the city. British officials were still planning for centuries of empire as India demanded independence. Soviet leaders were still claiming communist superiority as bread lines stretched for blocks. Empires never believe they're falling until they've already fallen. The propaganda continues until the last day. The official statistics remain optimistic. The speeches promise renewal. Everything is fine until it isn't. Today, we're told the economy is strong while food banks overflow, that democracy is thriving while trust collapses, that institutions work while they crumble before our eyes. Denial isn't just a river in Egypt. It's the final stage before collapse. And understanding this pattern leads us to the most important question. What comes next? So what happens after empire falls? History offers two possibilities, darkness and renewal, sometimes both. Rome's fall plunged Europe into centuries of chaos. But from that chaos emerged new civilizations, new ideas, new possibilities. The British Empire's end brought independence to billions. The Soviet collapse freed hundreds of millions. Decline isn't destiny, it's transition. The old world is dying, and the new world struggles to be born. The pattern of collapse is fixed, but what emerges from the ashes is not. That depends on the people who survive it, on whether they learn from history or repeat it, on whether they build something better or something worse. You choose what comes next. Every empire collapses. That's the pattern we can't escape. But every collapse is also an opportunity. The question is whether you'll be ready, whether you'll understand what's happening while others remain in denial, whether you'll position yourself for what comes next. The pattern is clear. The timeline is uncertain, but the outcome is inevitable. Overextension, debt, inflation, division, elite extraction, evaporating trust, collapsing competence, denial until the end. 1. Expand beyond capacity. 2. Borrow to maintain illusion. 3. Inflate away the debt. 4. Divide the population. 5. Extract before collapse. Every superpower in history has followed this exact sequence. Not some of them, not most of them, every single one. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The names change, the flags change, the technology changes, but the pattern remains identical across millennia. And right now, as you watch this, the pattern is playing out again. The question isn't whether this cycle will complete. It always does. The question is whether you'll recognize it in time to prepare, whether you'll see through the denial, whether you'll understand that empires don't fall to enemies. They collapse from within. If you made it this far, comment pattern recognized. If you'll never see history the same way again. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Subscribe if you want to keep digging.